Hey, and welcome to Chapter 1 from the Mary Van Hoon textbook, Human A&P. We will start with an introduction to the human body, and there's going to be two parts to this PowerPoint, two recordings. So this chapter really gives you a whole new language, all new anatomical terminology that will be helpful in your future endeavors if you're going into healthcare in order to communicate with your peers and colleagues. And so we're going to learn a lot of information in chapter 1. The purpose of this is to maybe add a little bit more detail and also some consistency with your textbook instead of the other PowerPoints that use different images and sort of reference a different text. So we'll start out by going through A&P, anatomy and physiology. These are complementary concepts. Anatomy is the study of the structure of the body. Physiology is the study of functions of body parts. And so these go hand in hand, and you can't fully understand the physiology if you don't understand the underlying anatomy. And some examples include some examples of complementarity between these two topics include bones. Why are bones so tough and rigid? Because they protect underlying organs. Why do we have these little projections called microvilli in our small intestine? To enhance absorption. And so we see a lot of structure suiting function throughout A&P. So there's some different topics, some different ways to study anatomy. We can do it, in different ways and will throughout the semester, including gross anatomy, where we look at images of larger structures. And that's gross anatomy is the study of these structures with the unassisted or unaided eye, meaning you don't have to use a microscope. We can also do this in specific areas of the body. So we can look at specific body regions, and that's called regional anatomy. If you were to further study those specific areas, we can look at a body system, specifically like the digestive or reproductive system, in system or systemic anatomy. And that's how we'll kind of progress once we get into chapter 5. You can also study surface anatomy, which looks at the more superficial kind of anatomy, but relates it to the deeper structures underneath. And this can happen with things like muscles with contraction of the muscles, or blood vessels that we can visualize under the skin, and so on and so forth. Now, there's other divisions of anatomy, other ways to study structures, including microscopic anatomy, where you use a microscope to look at different structures like cells, and that's cytology to be specific. And the study of tissues typically involves microscopes use, and that is called histology. There's also developmental anatomy, which studies things like the phases of development and embryology. So lots of ways we could look at these different body parts and systems, and we'll kind of go through a progression and work up to the systems. In physiology, you can do kind of the same thing. We could study individual body systems and the physiology of those systems. We can also look at the cellular processes that are going on and the physiology of those reactions that are taking place in the cells and relate them to the anatomy of the body system or body part. Okay, so one more time, anatomy and physiology go hand in hand, and there is a concept of complementarity. These are complementary pieces of science that we can't kind of separate, especially in this course. And your textbook gives the example too of teeth. Teeth are designed for different functions. So the molars are designed to grind up food. The incisors in the front or anterior part of the mouth are really, really great at kind of cutting through food and just taking a bite of something. But the molars can grind it up because of all the cusp that they contain. Canines are really, really good at tearing up food. So you can see there's lots of different examples, and I hope you'll learn more and think about them in this way as you go through the different chapters in the textbook. All right, So in every living organism, there's kind of a hierarchy to the organization of that organism. And in humans, we're going to look at the structural organization of the body and start from the least complicated level and work our way up to the most complex level of organization. So at the smallest level, there's the chemical level of organization, specifically starting with atoms. And atoms come together and have bonds that create molecules. Molecules will help to develop macromolecules and organelles, and those organelles are parts of cells. So cells are the next kind of level of organization on the hierarchy here. And if we have two or more types of cells together that have the same structure and same function, technically that's a tissue. And if we have two or more tissues together that are working together for a common cause, that makes up an organ. And different organs work together in organ systems, but all the body organ systems work together to make up the entire organism. And that's the most complex level of organization in this hierarchy. And so your book uses this picture just to kind of show from least complicated to most complex, this is the progression. So we start with a chemical level, and we see atoms that make up molecules that help to make up organelles that make up cells. Cells make up tissues. Tissues come together to make up organs, which are part of organ systems. And all the organ systems form the organism. That's also how we'll study this textbook is we'll start, with the chemical level in chapter 2, the cellular level in chapter 3, histology, the study of tissues in chapter 4, and then we'll look at system by system, how do things work. We also have to say that there are requirements for living organisms. So we'll go through those kind of one by one here in the next few slides. First off, maintaining boundaries, so separating the internal and external environments. And so we see this even at the cellular level because cells are the smallest living unit, they're alive. And so the plasma membrane of a cell separates the intracellular fluid and organelles from the extracellular materials. And this is important to maintain homeostasis. And at a much more complicated level, the skin separates the organism's internal environment from the outside. And so boundaries are important. Also, movement is important. We'll see that especially in the cardiovascular system as blood vessels in the heart move things along. And in the digestive system where smooth muscle contracts to move materials along through the alimentary canal. Living organisms also are responsive. They respond to a stimulus. And one of the classic examples of this is touching a hot stove. We withdraw our hand if we touch a hot stove. Living organisms also digest materials. They take in different materials, usually by the mouth, and then they extract good stuff, nutrients from that, and those molecules are absorbed into the bloodstream. And so those are used for different metabolic processes. And since we have digestion, we're going to create waste. And so excretion is also another characteristic of living things. And this is just removal of waste. Usually, we talk about this with the digestive and urinary system, but we could also think about other body systems here too. Metabolism is an important term to keep in mind this semester. It's the sum of all chemical reactions that take place inside the body or inside the body cells specifically. The main two types of reactions include catabolic reactions, which is taking a bigger molecule and breaking it down into small components, and the opposite of that, anabolic reactions, which is taking those smaller components and building something larger. Organisms also have some sort of capacity for reproduction, and that includes cells. Cells are able to reproduce with cellular division, and growth. Growth can happen because cell number increases, and when we have more cells, we have growth in the size of the organism too. So humans are multicellular. We have trillions of cells, and we have to kind of think about the cellular level quite a bit. So we'll study that more in chapter 3. But all cells depend on the organ systems that work together in order to meet the needs of the cells. And again, cells are alive too. So all of these different levels of organization will interact, and we'll see that in the next few chapters. Okay, so I'm going to go through the organ systems a little bit, but we will study these throughout the semester. We'll study some more than others, but in Anatomy 2, you'll focus on others that we don't cover this semester. So major functions, really quickly here. Integument includes the skin, the largest organ we've got, hair, and nails, and this is important for covering and protecting us. It also helps out with initiating vitamin D synthesis, which is important because vitamin D helps us absorb calcium, and it provides us with sensation and glands, and also is going to help with immunity in some way. So we'll learn that more in chapter 5. Okay, the skeletal system provides us with protection, a framework for muscles, and those muscles, of course, are going to help out with movement. And so also the cardiovascular system has a relationship here because red bone marrow in the bones is the site of erythropoiesis, where red blood cells are made. The muscular system contracts in order to cause movement, and it also is responsible for things like posture, generating heat with thermoregulation. And I didn't say this, but the integumentary system also plays a big role with thermoregulation. So you can see that these systems do have some overlapping functions. The nervous system is responsible for coordination and planning and integration of what's going on with our environment and responding to the environment with the appropriate activities, with the appropriate output. So it's a major control center of the body. Another big control system in the body is the endocrine system. This includes a lot of different glands. They're variable as far as their size and their structure and their location, and they make hormones. And so these hormones are regulatory chemicals that have lots of different effects, including growth, reproductive success as far as creating gametes or stimulating their development, and metabolism. Next up, the cardiovascular system includes the heart and blood vessels, and this is important for transport of blood, oxygen and other gases, and nutrients. Also the maintenance of some vital signs like heart rate and blood pressure. The lymphatic system and immune system are often lumped together because the lymphatic organs are a place where immune cells and proteins live and proliferate. And so this is another transport system. It also is a site where we find lots of white blood cells or leukocytes that have various immune functions. Respiratory system is where gas exchange takes place, and it takes place not just in the lungs, but gas exchange is going to come up also with the cardiovascular system. So there's some interaction between those body systems, and so this is responsible for moving gases like oxygen and also CO2, carbon dioxide. And the digestive system is responsible for extracting nutrients and also chemically breaking down materials as well as mechanically breaking down materials as they pass through this system in what's called the alimentary canal. The urinary system is also responsible for excretion along with the digestive system, and it's also responsible for water and electrolyte and acid-base homeostasis. The respiratory system also plays a big role as a physiological buffer system. The reproductive system enhances reproductive success. So there's a slide for both male and female reproductive systems. And there's also a site for female reproductive system where there is the uterus, and there's this area for development during pregnancy or gestation and reproductive success and enhancing the health of a newborn or neonate. Okay, so that was a real quick 5-minute body systems overview. Organs that are in each of these different systems or something to just kind of look over generally, but we will go into much more detail as we get through and into those subsequent chapters. So just hang on if you're looking for more detail now. What do humans need though to survive? So we need some factors that are just definite, and you may be able to kind of add to this list, but this is kind of a general list including nutrients. And so we can see more specific examples as we go through the slides. Nutrients include things like macromolecules like carbohydrates, proteins, fats. These all help to provide energy in some ways, but proteins are super important for lots of different reasons too. They're also receptors that our cells use to communicate. They help to act as channels for transport in and out of our cells. And minerals and vitamins help out with chemical reactions as well. Oxygen is needed for the creation of energy. Water is abundant because it's a solvent, and so it's able to dissolve a whole lot of different solutes and transport them, especially within our bloodstream. And so water is also used in the body for things like cushioning. Normal body temperature is important too. We'll see in the chemistry chapter that if pH or body temperature is really extremely changed one way or another, it can change the shape of our proteins. And when they can't function properly, neither can we. And so that could lead to disease or death. Atmospheric pressure is also vital because this is the pressure of the air around the body, and it influences the exchange of air in the respiratory system when we breathe in and out. A big term to keep in mind here is homeostasis. So you've had a few big keywords, metabolism earlier and homeostasis now. So homeostasis is just the maintenance of a pretty constant internal environment, and that's within a certain limit or range. We can maintain homeostasis and need to by the use of negative feedback loops. If we don't maintain homeostasis, then we could experience some sort of disease process, and it could be detrimental to different body systems. So the nervous system and the endocrine system really help out with maintaining homeostasis, and there's lots of variables that they regulate, and they're not the only systems, they're just the main two regulatory systems. But other things can jump in and help to regulate variables such as blood glucose levels or blood sugar, body temperature, blood pH, blood oxygen levels, whatever it is. And so these different feedback mechanisms will involve a receptor that detects the level of the variable, a control center that will kind of integrate that information, and then an effector that will carry out the effects of the whole feedback mechanism. So receptors are kind of like sensors that monitor the levels of the variable and then send that information to a control center. And the control center will say, okay, this is what we're going to do. This is the response. And they'll send that response to the effector. And so this leads to the outcome. Now, in negative feedback loops, what happens is let me say this differently than what it says on the slide. In a negative feedback loop, the effector will carry out a response that works in the opposite direction of the stimulus. All right, so what do I mean by that? I mean, if your body temperature is high, then our receptors detect that information. Our control center will say, we need to sweat. And so with sweat, the negative feedback loop is going to help us to bring body temperature back down. Now, let's do another example. If the stimulus is low blood sugar levels. Then this feedback loop is going to say, let's release a hormone called glucagon. Glucagon raises blood sugar levels if we're fasting or starving, and so brings it back up to a normal range, homeostasis range of sugar. All right, and so once we get back to that normal range, we can turn all of this off, and we don't need to keep doing whatever it is that we're doing. All right, I also think about just pumping gas. You know, when you pump gas and you put the nozzle into the tank, you pump it and then it gets to a certain level back to normal range and it turns off, right? So we want to turn these off eventually once we get back to that normal range. With positive feedback, what happens is we enhance whatever our stimulus was. And so I'm going to show you an example here. Platelet plug formation. If we have a break in a blood vessel wall, it's been damaged for whatever reason, you're in the kitchen and a knife accidentally cuts your hand, what happens is platelets will start to come to that area. Now platelets come in and they release chemicals that attract more platelets to the area. And those come in and they release chemicals that attract more platelets to the area, and so on and so forth until we have this big platelet plug and we can stop this whole process. Another kind of example here that's commonly used is childbirth. When the fetus head is pushing against the cervix, receptors detect that pressure and they alert the control center in the brain that says, here's some more of a hormone that causes more uterine contractions. And the uterus will contract and move the fetal head closer to the cervix. So there's more pressure against the cervix, more oxytocin hormone is released, more uterine contractions, so on and so forth until completion. And that's a big difference between positive and negative feedback. With positive feedback, we enhance the initial stimulus and we go with that until completion. So again, homeostasis is important, constant maintenance of the internal environment, and if it's disrupted, it could lead to a disease process. And this does happen more with age-related changes in the body. So I will leave off with part 1 here, and please let me know if you have questions.